I just wanted to take a few minutes to make some notes, I guess, for myself for future reference and in case it might be of interest to you all. Uh, my yard was talking to me again today. I had plans to. I have various tasks that I'm trying to get done before things start to really freeze up, but then I decided on the last bed that I dug that I wasn't gonna do the sunflowers and okra and amaranth there because evidently deer like okra and the deer have started to come in and eat the flowers off of plants they're not even supposed to be eating. So I think that circular bed will become an herb garden, and because I think that deer are less interested in plants that have a strong aromatic element. So, but before that, so I went yesterday and we got the first sort of damp, not a heavy rain, but sort of a dampness kind of rain. And so I finished digging it, got the sod out, added the compost and manure, and went and got the leaf mulch and mixed it all together. And now I have like a nice, lovely mound. But I woke up today and I was going to get mulch hardwood shredded mulch from the compost center to put on top of it. But I decided to treat myself to some more bulbs, even though I'm pushing the limit for spring bulbs. I placed an order, and it's my birthday today, so I just treated myself to a few more bulbs that will hopefully be coming in the not too distant future, so I can get them in the ground. So, but I realized that it's much easier to plant bulbs if you haven't put the hardwood mulch down. So my task for the morning that I was thinking about doing got delayed, and I can't do my shredding. I can't do my leaf stuff, and I can't mow the grass because it's wet from yesterday. So I thought, well, what can I do before I go for a nice walk with a new friend? And so I thought, well, I have this box of red spider lily bulbs that I have been found in the various diggings that I have done. And you should look up red spider lily bulbs because they're quite interesting. I can't remember if I talked about them before, but they're related to amaryllis. They're more petite. They send up foliage in the fall and winter, and then that dies back. And then in the late summer, early fall of the next year, they have these red, very dainty, lacy red flowers. And they're in the allium family. Well, yeah, so they're related to amaryllis, but they're bulbs that rodents don't like, and it keeps critters away. So these were planted in Japan around the rice fields and the cemeteries, and their blooming time coincides with a sort of Buddhist ancestor worship. And so there are a lot of imprints of these red spider lilies in anime art and film and that sort of thing that has sort of a goth element to it because of the cemetery association and red and blood or whatever. So I have all of these, I have this whole box of these bulbs that I've dug up, and I've been feeling guilty that I haven't got them in the ground. So I thought, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll put them between the crepe myrtles that I've cleared out. And that will be a good place to keep them. And since they do grow over the sort of late fall and winter, when the leaves are down, they'll get enough sun, but they won't, clog up space otherwise. But then what I realized is that, so I have cleared out at the surface level a lot of the crepe myrtles, but it's kind of like all these things in doing this work is that it's layers, right? It's phases. You take one step, and then with this one step of clearing, you can see better what the situation is, and then you clear again, and then you step back and you see better. And so with each deeper layer you go in, you get a little bit more clarity. And so I had only done a little bit of clearing on these crepe myrtles. I did the initial clearing out of the dead wood and thinning them out, and then I did an initial clearing of the ground. But then really what needs to be done now is to dig into the soil and attempt to remove as much rootstock from these binding plants that were all in the crepe myrtles, including honeysuckle and this catbrier, which is kind of like a crazy, super prickly, the stem is like a super duper prickly rose, but they're very thin, and then the leaves look a little bit like a clematis. And so I had never really encountered catbriers in Pennsylvania. I don't know if they don't go that far north. I think they're subtropical, and they are around different parts of the world. But they are native to Arkansas. So it's interesting because probably crepe myrtles are native to Arkansas. So really, if I were to be more situating the land, I would I would not be getting rid of the Catbriers to keep the crepe myrtles, but c'est la vie. These Catbriers are very brambly and difficult. And so I started digging them out, and it's interesting because they're rhizomatic, but they're not like nice little plump rhizomes like iris. They're knobby, and then they shoot these runners out underground, and then they pop up, and then you get another thin, spindly stalk. And even though they look very delicate because they're thin, they're very strong, and they're pretty vicious, and in some ways it reminds me of, in Wicked, the Glinda, right, who looks very petite and all that, but she has like a strength about her too. And so I was clearing out, I was getting to the root of things, which in this work is part of trying to get to the root of things. And it's not easy because you can kind of see things, but then they go underground and you can't get to them. So we all have limited amounts of information, and we know there's more information down there. Like, if we could just keep digging, but usually there's some rocks or something, and you can't actually dig deep enough to actually get to the source. But there's a continuum of what you can see and what you can't see, which is, I was thinking about that this morning. And the other thing I was thinking about is essentially this one crepe myrtle, when I kind of traced it back, because again, it's almost like these maps. Like, someone asked me about a research topic today, and I can't just give it. Like, essentially what you need to do is find a nugget that interests you, and then there's something adjacent to that nugget, and then there's something adjacent to that nugget, and then you keep building out, but you build out your own structure. And it's kind of like how these rhizomes were working. Like, there's a prickly bit sticking up over the ground over here that I pruned back, but I know it's still underground, and then it connects, and then it moves over, and there's another one, and there's another one. So it's these nodes. And what the nodes like to do, what I found in this one tree, is that the Catbrier had essentially, their strategy is to get up right next to the base of the tree and send its roots under, so that its rootstock, it doesn't actually forage with the rootstock, but it hides among the other thing. And so you can't, I think over time you can literally, keep pruning it back and keep reducing the energy available to it, because it won't be able to photosynthesize, and eventually the rootstock will die back. But there's no way to physically remove it because it's entangled with the thing you want to keep. And so it kind of goes along with that plaque, right? Grow in the cracks. And is there a lesson there, right? Like, sometimes there are things growing in the cracks that you don't want there, and you'd really like to get out, but you can't get to them. So then you have to play the long game of waiting it out and knocking it back. But then are there aspects of that that could be used to our advantage? Like, when we think of tools in our toolbox, maybe the growing in the crack thing is good. And so so that was the thing. And then I was sort of thinking about, again, these systems and chimeras and blending and prosthetics and parasites versus symbiotic, and which was this, because the honeysuckle definitely was a binding. It was a tight binding around the crepe myrtle, to the point that it would actually strangle and prevent the xylem and phloem in the canes of the crepe myrtle. The Catbrier, even though it was a lot pricklier, it was looser. And so even though it was using the structure of the crepe myrtle shrub to clamber up and to give it support, I don't know that it would have killed it as quickly as the honeysuckle. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm not sure. They had similar strategies of using something else to build itself up. But I think one was probably more imminently threatening to the livelihood of the crepe myrtle, and the other one was less threatening but more prickly. And so I was just thinking about that again with these Web3 systems, or with these AI systems. And I was watching Kelvin Oberon had a recent video that he put out, and he was making some conjectures about the role of AI and peace and love and different things. And there was a part of me, it was good. It was a good practice, because again, it's walk the walk, do as I say, not as I do. Sometimes I still have a hard time without going wait, but, and practicing the curious observer, and not necessarily having to insert myself and say that's a good That's a good exercise. So thank you for that, Calvin. And the way it plays into this growing in the cracks thing is that when I was working at Bartram's Garden, and I had a desk job, but like I loved walking the grounds, and I had colleagues that uh, they managed an urban farm, an educational farm, and it was only it was 3 acres, and it had been converted from a baseball field. But there was a seep, and so there were parts of it that were wet and had to be sort of, it wasn't a channel exactly, but there were like trenches, and they were it was an organic oriented farm and this Korean natural farming practice. And it really, their philosophy was less about growing food than actually preserving soil. Like that was, they were really interested in soil, which is interesting given where my research has taken me in terms of understanding soil and microbial communities. And so part of the technique was that you really had minimal disruption in weeding. Like it wasn't about it looking perfect. It was about controlling weeds to the extent that you could still have your crops. But even when you would pull the roots, like you had to do it either very delicately, or it was just like for annual roots cutting the top so that you didn't disrupt the soil structure. And in this farming plot that they had, they didn't have raised beds, even though like sort of wet soil was an issue in parts of this area. But what they would have would be raised, hilled up sections that would be maybe 10 inches off the ground, and then there would be a walking area between them. But they were natural, and there was no hard edge. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think I asked my friend about it once, and he said, well, you know, as soon as you put up a boundary, like a hard boundary, that the weeds and the things will get in there, and then they're much harder to get out. And so if you don't actually have the hard boundary, it's less disruptive to manage the crop weed balance than it is if you have a firm boundary. And this is what sort of my yard is teaching me all the time, is about these firm boundaries. And so again, in trying to like fight back against my initial inclination of like inserting what I think based on my research or what I've seen, is just to sort of absorb and go, yeah, like the Chinese farmer parable, like maybe we'll see, like we'll see what that is. And so yeah, so Kelvin, thank you for giving me this good opportunity to practice that, and then reflecting on that today, and boundaries. And once you set a boundary, a hard stop, then actually sometimes it makes your life more complicated, because these flower beds that the crepe myrtles were in these little concrete scalloped edge things, and they were a hard boundary, which both limited the growth of the crepe myrtle, and it gave lots of little wedgy bits for these honeysuckle and other things to get in, and then a kind of bind around and attach to, so that the removal part is more challenging. So that's kind of the main thing that I was thinking of. And again, the clambering up, is it a honeysuckle? Is it the catbrier? Is it, it does to me feel like this dance, like these plants are dancing together, and what is the dynamic of the dancing? And so when I was looking up catbrier, and if it was native to Arkansas, and there are many kinds of relatives of this plant, again, in tropical and subtropical areas. And some, I think they were initially thought to be related to the lily, but now they're in their own category. And sometimes they're described as a climbing asparagus, which is interesting. And I guess if you get them early in the season, that before the thorns come out, you can saute them and eat them like an asparagus, which is interesting. I mean, I think there's a poisonous kind, so don't look up stuff before you do any foraging. But I thought that was like climbing asparagus. That was interesting. About that, I had a little birthday call, and so I needed to take a break. And now I'm a little distracted as far as what I just already said and what I still need to tell you. So if I'm repeating something, please forgive me. This is just an informal conversation. So I was talking about, like, it used to be the lilies, and then it was like asparagus. And when I looked it up, I thought this was kind of an interesting website, Mira Karatkitsu, about different kinds of plants and their meanings. And so she has a lot of information about the mythological origins and medicinal uses and sort of background. It's actually a very nice website. I would be interested in seeing some of the other plants that she features. And So I'm just going to read the beginning, and this is to Smilax aspera. And again, Smilax being this Greek mythological nymph who was after Crocus in a, I guess maybe non-reciprocated way that ended up with them both being turned into plants. And so I'm not sure if, I doubt mine is Smilax aspera. There are many different kinds. Mine doesn't have this beautiful variegation and really pronounced heart shape, but definitely has the thorn. So there are many kinds of Smilax, but I think roughly they're similar. So it says rough bindweed, also known as Smilax, is a perennial evergreen vine with dark green leaves, spines on the stem, and bright red berries growing in clusters. The vine climbs and entwines with a lover's embrace, and though the heart was not used by the ancients as a symbol of love as it is today, the heart shape of its leaves can be a reminder of its sacred wisdom, to tread carefully when entwining with another and to maintain healthy boundaries. The details of their story are sparse, but the myth of the problematic love between Smilax and Crocus serves to remind us of the wisdom of not trying to force incompatible bonding. Sacred to Dionysus, the vine was also believed to be an antidote to poisons and may have been drunk before or after the ingesting of toxic or entheogenic substances. So that's really interesting because I've been listening to the last parts of Stealing Fire, and there's a whole chapter on the development of alphabetamines and entheogens and sort of spiritual ceremony, and then the addition in more recent times of very loud acoustical contributions like the speakers and raves, and also projection of imagery and geodesic domes. And part of what I talked about in my review of Wicked was this idea of boundary crossing into other information spaces, and that I'm still working on the Peter Kingsley books, definitely still preliminarily, but the ancient philosophy, mystery, and magic, Empedocles and the Pythagorean tradition. And then I have this other big one that's like, I just started, you can see how little I've read, but it's more about Jung and catafalque, Jung and the end of humanity. And so really what Kingsley is working through is sort of what the heck happened to shamanistic traditions in the West, and how is it related to how the dysfunction, like social dysfunction, that we have now. So this idea of it being about addressing toxins in the body, what they're saying is like these would be, initially it's not like a king going to a banquet and thinking he's going to be poisoned, so he does prophylactically this ingestion of the herb, but what she's sort of implying is that this would be a ceremonial process where people who knew that they were going to be ingesting toxic substances for altered states would be consuming some aspect of Smilax. And yeah, oh, and it was also related to sarsaparilla, so that's interesting. And evidently during the Civil War, the Confederacy, they would use the rhizomes to ferment them and make a weak beer. Let's see, preferred climate, woodland. Height and spread, the vine reaches a length of 2 to 30 meters, 6.5 to 98 feet. So I guess it can go up really high if you have a really high tree. And it says there is a related plant that is toxic, so you have to be careful about that. But you can see in this, if you're watching, I didn't see these berries, but you can imagine how much that they would spread. They look a lot like small grapes, and so this is talking about the Dionysian mystery schools and the myth. It says, not much is known about her metamorphosis, but both Ovid and Pliny the Elder tell the story of Smilax, whose unrequited or complicated love for Crocus transformed her into a vine bearing her name. Crocus, who was unsatisfied by his love for Smilax, was also transformed into the short, flowering perennial bulb of the same name, and that's the saffron crocus. Let's see, the rough bindweed is an evergreen climbing vine, and the crocus is a stout, short-lived flower that grows close to the ground. It is easy to understand how a relationship between the two would be very problematic. And then here's a discussion on this page of the mystery schools. Like all vines, rough bindweed is, oh, interesting, all vines, sacred to Dionysus. And think about the vines, right, and Web3 and entanglement. The god of revelry, sacred madness, and viticulture. The similarity of the rough bindweed's ripe red fruits to the grape clusters should not be overlooked, and any images of the god and his retinue of satyrs, maenads with clusters of berries and heart-shaped leaves may in fact be a combination of his two other sacred vines, the grape and the ivy. It is also interesting to note, according to Discordus de Materia Medica, a rough bindweed decoction was believed to be an antidote for deadly poison and could be taken as a drink beforehand or after. This would imply to me that people were ingesting poisons intentionally, otherwise why would they be drinking a decoction beforehand? And then this is on the coupling. And it's interesting to me with this idea of like boundary. And that was interesting. It was another aspect of Kelfin's talk, was this idea of bodies as vehicles for the soul. And where are our boundaries, right, of consciousness, both in the dream state and in our physical body. And then in our physical body, as we're moving about our lives, maybe in a vehicle, right? Like the soul isn't a vehicle of the body, and the body isn't a vehicle of transportation. And where are these hard boundaries? And that is a big question, right? Like especially as we're starting to deal with distributed cognition, socially integrated organisms, combining engineered intelligence with human intelligence, with other intelligence of other life forms, or other beings, other relatives on the earth. It's a good question about boundaries. Boundary, and that boundary is relative to like recursion and autopoiesis and creation and differentiation, right, of all of that. And so, yeah, lots of questions to be asked. This is from the website about Smilax. Like the grapevine and the ivy, which are also sacred, the rough bindweed is a vine that climbs and entwines with the lover's embrace. Okay, so I think we already read this part. The wisdom of this vine is in treading the line between entwining with another and maintaining healthy barriers, between holding on and letting go. The similarity of the rough bindweed's ripe red fruit to the grape should not be missed. Okay, the thorny leaf and stem are protective edges. It shows us how to be careful not to squeeze too hard, or we may strangle that which we love. The details of their story are sparse, but problematic love serves to remind us of the wisdom of not trying to force bonding. And sometimes two things are not compatible, and it is kinder to let go and move on. And then it talks about the toxins and ecstasis, and then it says the rough bindweed teaches us to reestablish boundaries of the self when that ecstatic state ends, and we must re-enter daily, everyday life. We can take with us all the new expanded awareness of divine ecstasy while also returning to our shared reality with deeper respect for the role that boundaries play in the cosmos. So yeah, so that's an interesting idea, sort of like the regrounding post-ecstatic experience. And so yeah, this decoction in the traditional medicines, young shoots can be eaten like asparagus. So yeah, so that was my conversation this morning with the rhizomes of the Catbriers here in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And yeah, what were the boundaries between the Catbriers and the crepe myrtle, and my entanglement with them as I was trying to remove the Catbriers out of the place where I wanted to put the red spider lily bulbs. And yeah, food for thought, right? Cracks, boundaries, perseverance, entanglement, our perceived sense of self and how it intersects with others, how we protect ourselves in those boundaries when needed, how we can transition through different states of consciousness. I have no answers. I just have more questions. So anyway, I've got to go out, get ready to go for my walk in the woods with a friend. She has a lot of beautiful trails she's been cultivating with all kinds of amazing moss. And since we had a nice, lovely, cool, misty day yesterday, I think the moss will be very happy. So, all right. Until later. Bye-bye.